Good morning. Pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Yaki Dayan. I'm running EdTech Israel. I'm honored to have you 5 CEOs coming all the way from Tel Aviv and America to meet you over here at the 13th ASU+GSV. I'm also super excited because it is the 5th time that we are having an Israeli delegation coming over to this prestigious summit. And without further ado, maybe we'll just go into the discussion. I would like to maybe say something about the title. When I said, "Can anything be SAASed?" the guys at the GSV were thrilled. Hey, yeah, it's an excellent title. My meaning was that how do we balance between technology and the thing that we like to see also in our solutions, like empathy, humanity, and many other things that are not necessarily given by chatbots and all the rest of the fancy AI that is giving you something that you cannot even explain. So maybe I'll start with Yair, he's running Amplio. They cater for the most difficult segment of students, the students with special education needs, that they need probably the best attention ever. How does technology play over there?
Good question, Yaki. First of all, the answer is no, not everything can be SAASed, right? I started the company because my son stutters, and I have a PhD in biomedical engineering, and I thought that I may be able to help him with technology. Actually, it was my mom's idea, to tell you the truth, like everything. And it turns out that my son, Niv, is very unique in many ways. He's not unique in having special needs. Actually, about 20% of kids, school-age children, have special needs. Speech pathology, dyslexia, autism, attention deficit, and others. We always think of the US as a not extremely social country. The law for disabled kids is amazingly social. It's the best law in the universe, I think, that requires every school to take care of every kid that needs some specific attention. And they spend $100 billion on this. But just like many other things, the intentions are amazingly good, but the implementation is somewhat poor. And back to your question, Yaki, when parents have a kid that has special needs, if they have enough money, they would send them to a specialist. Actually, I have a very good friend who has a son who is on the autistic spectrum. He's hired 12 people to take care of his son. And there is no better way. There is no better way. But the same speech pathologist, the same dyslexia interventionist, the same occupational therapist that in private practice yield excellent results within months, when they come to schools, for some reason, the needle doesn't move. The same kids, the same pathologists, a totally different outcome. And then you can ask, okay, so what's the reason? Don't they have enough time? They have enough time. It's still 30 minutes or 40 minutes a week. Do they do something different? Do they know something else? Not necessarily. The result is that it just doesn't scale. A school is a huge system with a lot of logistic, regulation, compliance issues, connected to general education and so on, that for some reason inhibits outcomes. And the needle doesn't move. In speech pathology, it takes 3.4 years to discharge a kid in schools and 6 months in private practice. We have shown that with technology, with SaaS technology, when used properly in tandem with a professional, you can reach the same outcomes as private practice in schools. Not for all kids, but for 80% of the kids. And that's Amplio.
Well, very impressive bottom line. But, if I think about scale, and if you want to actually scale, then sometimes everything that is a hybrid that connects humans and technology have the difficulty to scale up. Maybe I'd like to ask you, Avi, as someone that is working with a totally different population, And especially, in the Israeli high tech, over the last couple of years, there have been so many unicorns. I don't know even the number. You probably know better than me. So how do you bring something else into the unicorn space?
Yeah, so I think it's around 70 and
70?
Yeah.
70?
Yeah, something like this. Most of them in the last 2 years. And Israel, it's quite a small country. And we're operating in Europe and Israel, but we grew tremendously in Israel in the last year in working with some of the unicorns. 13,000 open jobs, 6,000 startups in Israel. And everybody is looking for the same talents, okay? Now, the new unicorns, they also stayed in Israel and started their operation in Israel. And so it's not just R&D centers, now it's also around customer success and sales and analysts, and it's opened a lot of opportunities in Israel, opportunities for more positions and opportunities for more, I think, untapped talent pools that everybody is looking for. We saw that a lot of the companies are trying to build talents from inside and from the outside, also from underrepresented communities. And then we came with a solution that in Elevation, we're solving the talent shortage by offering academy as a service for the companies to upskill and reskill current employees and train to hire new employees. So working with the companies to better understand their specific job description and the context that they're looking for, building the right training and the right academy for them as a service, everything around that, and then finding the right talent, training them to be hired by the companies, and also building talents from the inside.
When you provide train for hire programs, how mindful are the companies for diversity and inclusion and equal opportunity, that the things that we all try to discuss constantly?
Yeah, so a lot of them are really having a hard time to find the right people. So it was a great opportunity. Some of them actually told us we're looking for 20% to be from underrepresented communities. In Israel, it's around Israeli Arabs, ultra-Orthodox, women in general that are just, I think, 28% out of the total tech sector, and people from the periphery. And some of them actually built programs with us only for these specific populations. So we had programs from a specific company to Israeli Arabs with relevant degrees that we trained them to be developers in this specific company. So it's a great opportunity, and we learned how to do a different screening process, integrating different platforms to make the process more blind. We keep saying that we're trying to be like the TV show, The Voice. We want to do the skills. We want to sit like this to see how are you doing around the skills that we want you to bring to the company, and then look who you are, okay? So we build it around assessment and different video tools, and probably Maya can tell us more about that, but it's working great due to the really crazy lack of talents in Israel.
Well, lack of talent is probably a global shortage, which brings me to Roy. You are part of this ThriveDX amazing company, but you're head of the SaaS division. Why do you need SaaS division? Where SaaS makes the difference in the business that you do?
It's a great question, and it's a bit provocative name. I mean, that we added the SaaS division to what does it mean? I mean, because we do a lot of different stuff. So yeah, exactly. Well, maybe. I think in the context of can everything be SaaS? I think that I agree that the answer is no, that you cannot turn everything 100% to SaaS, but I think that...
I can hear the but. No but, yeah.
But I think you can add SaaS components to almost everything you do. And other than, of course, the advantages for the maybe multiples of the company, and let's put this aside, let's talk about the advantages for the learners, right? The customers, the learners, the education. And I think that in the context of ThriveDX, right? So ThriveDX, we're a cybersecurity and digital transformation training and education company. Pretty big already, almost 2,000 plus employees globally, working with universities, with corporations. And our challenge is to take millions of learners and help them to gain skills in cybersecurity, from basic awareness to up to advanced training in cyber professionals in companies. And the question, the question there, and why SaaS, right? Because a lot of time we think about SaaS in the context of what we are losing. We are losing maybe the human touch or human care. And I'll address this in a minute, but what we're gaining while we are going with SaaS platforms and including AI and including more learning that is, it is machine-driven, but what we can achieve is learning that is learner-centered and not trainer-centered. You can actually standardize the quality, because when you have something that every trainer does their own thing, then it's very hard, and you want to scale this, and not just scale this for you as a company, but you want to give the same high level of quality of learning to every one of the people, which is very difficult to do if you trust that every one of the human beings in every one of these locations will know exactly what to do. So you add this component that it's not dependent 100% on the human being, but the human being is there together with the machine, and they complement each other. You can add components of adaptive learning or NLP in other aspects. You can add aspects of more hands-on training and hands-on learning that is complementing like the live trainer that is there. And you can allow flexible learning environment. And this is, you mentioned the context of diversity. Accessibility to knowledge, accessibility to training. If you are sitting in a village somewhere, not in New York City, right? And you want to get access to high quality learning, right? So the fact that you can, if you have to be in the classroom in Harvard or in another institution, it's very difficult. So if you add the ability for people to learn at the same quality level, and there are still some gaps, so people are still required. So we need to complement the SaaS, right? With, and maybe at some point the AI will be as good enough. I mean, I don't know. It's not like I'm not a few, like I don't know. But you can add levels of support and like you can actually, because you reduce some of the trainer, I'd say cost even in a way, you can actually bring more support to the learners. Most of the time they spend with the machine, and the rest of the time you can actually give them support that is tailored for their needs.
So eventually you are creating, or let's say you are helping so many people to actually reach the job market with new jobs. Which brings me to Skillset, that this is, Maya, that's what your company is doing. And I like very much your slogan. I actually, since we started to have this communication, I think I have the sense that you're creating some kind of a cult. Let's get rid of CVs altogether. No CVs anymore.
Absolutely, this is what we call for. So, as you said, Skillset Mission is to create a new job matching standard and basically create a more diverse and inclusive workforce for everybody. We're using SaaS solutions, and I will say in a bit why it's not enough just to have the solution, but we are trying to create a new taxonomy and provide people with opportunity to be judged basically only on their proven performance and not for their history, job history and credentials. And we chose to focus, and like Avi said, with this untapped pool of employees in the market and with the low-wage employee, the blue-collar, entry-level jobs, because as you said, there is a huge, massive shortage of workers around the globe. And alongside with that, there's, and this conference is all about that, there's a need to also work with those type of employees, provide them more upskilling, reskilling opportunities inside the organization to retain them and to have better workforce in those type of industries. We are working closely with Professor Joseph Fuller from Harvard Business School. He's the one who's leading the Future of Work project in Harvard, and his main research and expertise is this untapped pool. And what's interesting about it is that you see people that, first of all, it's estimated with more than 27 million people around the US yearly. And those people are, most of them work, but they're underemployed and have great skills. So what we are fascinating about is the opportunity to test their real skills, real performance in live experiences, and then create those opportunities for job mobility inside the organization or for other career path. And I think this type of change is what needed to create different workforce. We need to. The reason we want to kill CV is that we believe that this tool is becoming obsolete to the changes that we are all dealing with in the workforce. So we need a new matching starter, all of us.
You're hired.
Well, I don't remember when was the last time I updated my CV. It was probably like 20 years ago. Actually, I had to update it because some government organization wanted me to submit my CV for some recognition, which made no sense to me. But okay, so I
just call it LinkedIn today. Just like
Yeah.
But SaaS goes in many times also hand in hand with AI, and I know that each company over here is using AI in one way or another. Actually, it's almost obvious these days. But I'd like to refer to you, Seth. I really like the way that over the years that I know what Sense is doing, I see that you are very humble about the AI predictions and much more advocate for something that is greater than just the AI tool that you are providing. And I remember that you told me it's not what can be SaaS, why it should be SaaS. So
I suggested a title name instead of everything can be SaaS, should everything be SaaSed?
So tell us a bit more about how do you approach to this connection between personal touch and AI?
So we believe it in a little bit of a paradigm shift. As a parent, as someone who's been involved in education for a number of years, if you ask people, the very first question they always ask about a class, whatever they're teaching, is how big is the class size? And that's because there's a notion that smaller classes provide higher quality education. And so every parent doesn't want their kids to go in very large classes. Some of this is a historical trend that higher education used to be much smaller. After the World War II, there was an enormous need for white-collar jobs, for retraining people, and so colleges expanded. And what occurred then was they scaled up by dumbing things down, right? So instead of reading an essay, you read a multiple-choice question or fill in the blank or things like that. They industrialized things in the way we knew how to industrialize things, by sort of making all of the connections a little bit easier to fit together. Now, and that paradigm still exists today if you listen to a lot of people talk about how they scale education. What we try and do at Sense is we look at open-ended questions, not multiple choice or fill in the blanks or things like that. We look at open-ended questions and we find common patterns in how people solve problems. And rightly or wrongly, so that we look for archetypes of how people solve problems and where they converge, meaning if I asked you to solve a physics problem or a math problem, there's only so many solutions. If I asked you to analyze a Shakespearean sonnet, those tend to diverge and they're very hard problems. The result is that the same sort of AI that improves with scale can come to fore. So if we think about search, we don't say, I want a search engine that only has a few searches per day. We say the opposite. We want a search engine that has billions of searches because the quality is going to be better. And we have to think about education that way. We have to think about scaling education where we have larger classes, maybe not physically larger, but virtually larger, because the data is going to be better. And if the data is better, the systems can be better. And what we do is we've shown that we can essentially build a TA that can handle a large percentage of student problems, that can provide feedback, can provide hints, can provide assessment that isn't just whether the answer is right or wrong, but how someone actually solved the problem and insights into that. And so I think that's when you think about SaaS, it's always about scale. It's always about what scale provides. And in education, scale means more data, and more data means better models, and more help for students, and more accessibility.
And Seth, let me take an extreme case of what you are saying, which is exciting. And that's in the world of special education, and I'll explain for a second why. Because in general education, when you learn math, you have to memorize stuff and you have to understand a concept. In special education, most of the kids have a developmental delay. They've missed 2, 3, 4 years because of different reasons. And now you need to squeeze those 4 years, actually multiply them, because what you can do at the age of 5 is very hard to do at the age of 7. So you need to squeeze many years of exposure to good language into a few months. It's extremely important, by the way, because language is the basis for everything you do, right? So I don't know if you know, but kids with dyslexia have a 16 years shorter lifespan. 80% of the people in the prison are dyslexic, which is a language problem. Now, in order to squeeze this, you need to repeat. You need repetitions. You need to rewire the brain. That's every learning process requires repetition. And that's the difference that, Roy, that you explained between teaching and learning. Teaching is establishing skills, right? Explaining. Learning in special education is mostly repetitions with feedback, with an entity. It can be a TA, an SLP, speech language pathologist assistant, or SaaS that can continue and never be exhausted, never be tired, never be frustrated, can scale as much as you need, and then you can get to these virtual scales that we are speaking about. So I think looking at an extreme case often explains the less extreme case.
I think you're 100% correct. And by the way, you know, a long time ago as a TA, when you get to your 300th assignment, you're tired, you're cranky, you know, you can't but help put that, you know, sometimes they say like the human touch is good, and sometimes it's very bad. And a well-trained system is able to overcome those types of things.
Yeah, and I think, Seth, you mentioned the data sample, and I think that that's really important. This is something that, you know, even if you scale and you have thousands of trainers and a lot of learners, there needs to be a way to collect the data and to analyze the data. So when we deal, for example, with one of the biggest challenges in the world right now, cybersecurity. So we tackle it from the human perspective, right? But even to understand what people need to learn, like where are the main gaps of a specific people in a bank or a learner that needs to start somewhere, we wouldn't know. Like we would estimate what needs to be the syllabus, and we will build a curricula and we'll train. But we actually, the scale and the fact that they are doing it on SaaS systems, that they are doing it on lab environments, that they are engaging with our system, we can actually have this feedback loop back into the system and makes the learning relevant.
And by the way, that's exactly what a lot of higher education lacks. In other words, there's a very crude feedback system, right? You know, in the course guide, you can give a teacher a low rating. But that hardly changes that. But now, especially like you talk about skills economy and things like that, now that feedback loop is going to become much more important because people are going to hire. You're not going to hire someone from a school or a training facility or something like that, or a boot camp where the people don't come in with skills that do it. And so that feedback loop has to be improved, which I think is. And I think
Yaki has the best example for a feedback loop. He just took a new job.
Thank you. Well, yes, there are many friends over here in the crowd that I already shared with them the news that effectively as of this week, I'm taking over as a CEO of a company called Neurotech Solutions in Israel, which exists already 10 years in the attention profiling and cognitive assessment. They were doing this in the clinical domain. I'm now shifting the company into the education domain. And think about like this 18 to 20 minute gamified activity that every student or kid or adult can do, where we learn so much about his attention profile and cognitive abilities. And this is basically data. We already have more than 500,000 assessments done so far in 20 countries around the world. So think about it, that it's now very objective data. What to interpret with that, what to do with it, it's up to the different applications to decide, but we provide the very objective data that today is, in many ways, is lacking about the student. And Maya, maybe how this can connect to what Skillset is doing.
Yeah, I wanted to relate that because what we do is we help companies get a better understanding and make profiling of the characteristic of the best, like the ideal employee who eventually will get hired and return in a job. But what we realized that, and we have enormous amount of data and get great results, but we still, and this is about why SaaS is not enough. We have the data, but we still need to work with the HR team leaders to be open to this new taxonomy. To, this market used to interview people based on their resume, which I believe we all agree is not enough. But they're using this, like teachers, their personal skills and intuition just to, in order to hire people. And now, once we provide the data, this is something they need to adjust to and to learn how to work with. So it's not enough to have the data. It's also important to work with the field and expert in this field to implement it and get people to work through based on this new perspective.
I think we also need to remember that we're talking about education. And education, a lot of it is around culture and localization. And then when you're talking about SaaS, it's one thing, but what we saw in the pandemic is that, for example, we looked at companies and they kind of trying to do more with less, and then it's kind of mixed the boundaries between different skills and positions. And each and every one of the companies has its own job description for the same position, a data analyst, for example. And this brought us to a place of the internal academies, and I think it's the same in different other areas of education. So maybe a mix between how to collect the right data and have some kind of a platform, but on top, remember that custom-made training and education, it's something that's still important.
And I would even argue and continue to that is that education is also very holistic. The learning experience is very holistic, and every attempt to try to break it down into behavioristical step usually doesn't work. And sometimes when certain companies are trying to automate the process and try to break it into behavioristic steps that maybe make sense when you look at them, but actually it really doesn't work at the end, because especially in special education, I remember a phrase that's saying that every special education teacher needs to be like MacGyver. Correct?
Yeah, that's, unlike general education that treats students as cohorts, right? You have a curriculum, a math curriculum, you have a class of 30 students, and you assume that they are more or less at the center of the bell curve. Special education is the long tail, so you have a group of 4 or 5 kids. One has a lisp, the other stutters, the third one has a language delay, and the fourth one is on the autistic spectrum. That one who has a language delay also has attention deficit and dyslexia, and so on. So it's so multidimensional, and you have 30 minutes for 4 kids. That's what the clinician has. So the clinician needs to use tools that somehow are relevant to all 4 kids, and MacGyver is an understatement of the year of what these special educators should do. But if they had 4 assistants, 1 per kid, then some of the session could have been done individually, highly tailored, extremely intensive, and it would reach better outcomes. We have, Amplio was selected as a special education platform for the entire state of Texas. That's one of our biggest achievements. And we see the diversity in one state of children, not only because they have diverse disorders, and not only because they are complex kids, but because of their backgrounds, their socioeconomic background, which totally impacts their capability to learn language. The language that they speak. How can you teach dyslexia in English to a child whose mother tongue is Spanish? Right? You cannot build it this way. So we have developed with a curriculum that is evidence-based, the only Orton Gillingham evidence-based curriculum that works for Spanish kids, this system that really replicates more and more.
I'm going to say something, I'm going to gently disagree a little with you, and I know it's, I used to run a company that targeted ads on television. And I always had this notion that highly targeted ads were going to be much more effective. And in some cases they are. But what I I misunderstood is how social people are about the types of things that they consume. And one of the things that doesn't work well with, we hear, and you go to any one of these sessions, they're talking about adaptive learning. And essentially it means that everyone sort of learns at their own speed. And what actually that does is it disrupts the social dynamics of a classroom. And it's very clear how students can help each other and things like that. And so it's a real question about, is that trade-off where people are sort of running at their own steam, but then no longer working on the same sort of problems with each other, how positive a trade-off that is. I think there's a lot of data to say in lots of areas that a classroom is defined very much by the social dynamics of students working on many of the same things.
No,
are you going to agree or disagree?
100% agree.
All right, then 100%. I'll let you interrupt me.
No, 100%.
This wouldn't be a panel with Israelis without interruptions,
yeah,
so I'm kidding.
Of course.
Go ahead.
And Israelis like to interrupt. And I think that in general, I 100% agree with you. And I think that, that there is the solution for that is actually to find the balance between what you can take from the SaaS, what we can take from whatever is fully automated, fully online, fully asynchronous in a way, and what you keep with the human being. And I think that once we find, for example, what we do at ThriveDX, this is exactly this. On the one hand, you have all the platforms and the lab environments and the AI and machines that help the student. But in many of our programs, like our boot camps, like even our corporate programs, we keep the trainer, we keep the facilitator to complement that. And that's why I think it's not binary. I think that you can have both. And yeah, I think that's what you also said.
Yeah.
No, I fully agree with you guys that it's not binary. I would like maybe to add another dimension to that. Because you mentioned the social interaction, which is extremely important. And data is also vital to do things. But sometimes also the way that we apply the data makes a lot of difference. And I'll give an example. My wife for 30-something years, almost 40, she's a math teacher. And she tells me that the number one mistake math teachers are doing is that when they group the kids to do group work and teamwork, they take kids from different let's say, mathematical skills and put them together so there will be diversity within a group. And she says that this is the number one mistake that many teachers are doing. Why? Because no one asked the good student if he's willing now to be a mentor to a slow student. You just force it on him and maybe he doesn't like it. Even more than that, sometimes when you ask a good student to explain how he came to an answer, he cannot explain it. He calculated in his head.
Sounds like the number one mistake is they're not teaching civics to the students then.
So, yeah, but so she found that it's 100 times more efficient when she grouped them with like students. And then they don't have this fear of math that they will speak something and maybe someone better than them will say something. So, she believes that maybe there's other teachers that believe different. I think that by providing them the data, sometimes they simply don't have the data. So many times we see teachers that they think, that one thing that one of the tools to decide if kids have maybe attention disorders, etc., is what is called teacher-parent questionnaire. It turns out that about only 30%, there's only about 30% agreement in those questionnaires in most cases. So either the teacher doesn't know anything about the kid or the parent doesn't know anything about his child. So to have the right data, you want to say something about that, Maya?
No.
Okay.
You can uncover like the unknown unknowns. That's one of the challenges is, you know what you know, right? Sometimes you also know what you don't know. But the problem is that there is these unknown unknowns in learning, and you don't know even like where you need to start. And sometimes these AI models or analyzing the data coming from the training itself or the screening itself can actually reveal things that you didn't know about yourself or that the company didn't know about what they need, and then to apply this in learning, which is part of the models we apply, and this is...
And that's also why you want to pick your models carefully, because you don't want to build black boxes that you can't then interrogate both how the structure of the models and why they were built that way.
I think you're taking a bit of a naive approach because schools are driven not necessarily by outcomes, but by logistics. There are huge systems that need to run. You know, thousands of kids are entering the school and then they're leaving the school and running around and so on. And placement is a good example. Kids are placed in groups not because of their skills quite often, but because of logistics. And this drives it. And then within those restrictions, within those limitations, you need to do your best.
China is a country where placement is entirely based on testing and assessment. France is another country like that. It's different all in different parts of the world.
And the US?
It's a mixed mess.
I think we should, talking about, once we are talking about data, I think we should be really careful about and specific about the data we collect, because I think HR is an example of a space where companies trying to solve the bias aspect of CV, and hiring became so complex in the last decade with so many SaaS solutions out there. Every step of the process is fragmented with another solution and another way, to provide more data. And I think it made the hiring became complex and expensive and tiring for HR personas and for job seekers as well. So what we're trying to do, and I think this is the mission, is to be really precise about what is the specific data that needs to be required, what is reflections on the business, and I think this is our responsibility, both as a creators sitting here, but also as clients, to work together and really crystallize the unique needs of each and every segment that we work with, and the data it needs to use in order to get better decision making.
I agree with Maya, and this is also what we said about diversity before, and we see this with, we see thousands and tens of thousands of learners that get into our training programs, our boot camps, with no knowledge, right? Now, any model, any assessment model may miss them, right? We need to find a solution to also know what we want to look for, because if we will screen for hard skills, we may miss people that have very good capability of learning and acquiring knowledge and acquiring skills. We won't know this.
Values.
Value, exactly.
Yeah.
Motivation. We find out that one of the best predictors for our students' success later in work is actually their motivation to start this work. And this is something that a lot of time we don't measure. And this allows us also to provide this to add more diversity, equity, inclusion into all these places that we work with.
So maybe we just need to remember it's around the data and around the service. SaaS is software as a service. So first realize what's the service that you want to bring and what you're trying to solve, not just come with a software and trying to put it on a problem and say, hey, we're SaaS and we're SaaSing everything.
I wish there was a very good tool to measure motivation. Maybe for a last round of comments before we actually run out of time, maybe I'll start with you, Maya. Maybe a final comment. What is, for you, a measure of success in your prediction of hiring?
I think, first of all, it's the metrics you hire based on. Because, hiring is reflected from so many things. It's such a personal and communication-based process. But also we need to be really clear about testing people, as they say, both of their performance skills and their motivation, but also to make sure that the process we provide, the hiring process for both sides, create motivation. So this is another aspect of it.
Yeah, for us, it's very clear, real-life impact. I started with telling you that my son stutters, and this was the impetus for starting the company. He still stutters, but he became a language teacher, and that's real-life impact.
Yeah, we look at the long-term success. So success is not just the fact that somebody got hired. The question is if they can build not just to get a job, but to build their career. And we look at this as a long-term thing. So we like a lifelong experience that we want to make sure that we actually change their trajectory in life. We help them to build a new path into a new future for them.
Outcomes.
That's about all.
For us, so we're serving strategic KPIs of HR, time to hire, time to fill, cost of hiring, but as a company, it always was around changing people's lives through education. So we're trying to measure that every person that we're touching in, we're taking at least 10% better and trying to change his life, even if it's like upskilling within a specific company and not changing completely his career path from something to be a developer.
Well, thank you very much for coming over here and for your talk, and thank you for listening. And I wish all of you a great and successful end of the summit. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.